I'm going to get into statutory deconstruction. We are starting now. So objectives today, understand the different types of statutes and rules. So understand the different types of statutes and rules and understand how to deconstruct the rules. So here's a little bonus tip that I thought I would include because I've gotten so many people just sort of panicking. So what to do if you panic, what to do if you're like in the actual exam, if you start to panic. And this is some of it. I did a session called the final forecast last week. That's really great. I'll talk about it in a second. So if you are like not, if you're having a tough time this last 10 or so days, it's a really great resource to watch. But just FYI, if you start to panic during the exam, start writing rules that you do know just to break the panic thought train. That's really important that if you're panicking, it affects your ability to retrieve rules. It affects your law knowledge. So start doing something that you do know, like anything, like write subjects, like just do something. And that will help to break that panic chain and help to like let it go. Think of a happy memory, right? Just to break, again, this is the whole goal is to break the panic. So like a vacation, a wedding, something bad happens to somebody you don't like, right? Something that makes you smile. Sorry, that was a little joke. But so think of something happy. I had to do this during the exam. Get up and get some water, splash some water in your face. Also take a few deep breaths. Like literally, like you have to sometimes do that. Sometimes if you are in a panic and you're like, I can't get up, I can't get up, I can't take a break, I don't have time, right? Like you need to, because you need to break that. And then often like when you do that, the thing that's stressing you out, you'll figure it out. So just a little bonus tip I wanted to throw in for everybody. Okay, some helpful resources. I'm talking about PTs tonight. There is absolutely still time for you to pass the PT and to figure it out. So some really good resources, I'm biased because I wrote them, but is my MPT book, particularly reading the chapters where I explain literally how to do everything, which there is the link to the one for the MPT for all you UBE takers. And here is the one for California. There is absolutely still time to figure out the PT. There's step-by-step instructions. You get digital access within a few minutes. So that is like, I think the number one resource. I'm not going through all of the PT stuff tonight. I'm just focusing on rules and like rule deconstruction in a particular scenario that I think is like the toughest thing. But I'm also going to talk about a few other things with PTs with rules, different types of rules. There's also the final forecast lecture that I gave. So that's something I did last week and we record it. A lot of people tell me that it really reduces their stress load. They're like feeling better. They know how to handle any sort of issue that comes up or that that may come up. I talk about making up rules. I talk about how do you make up a rule? How do you guess better on the MBE? All sorts of stuff. Good PTs to practice that are free. So these two things, there's California PT book and a multi-state PT book for UBE and the final forecast. So these are two things that I think, I'm doing a free session. We're going to get into all the nitty gritty, but I was like, if there's a couple of things that I think are great, then, definitely check these out. There's not a coupon code. I don't generally do discounts. There's not a coupon code, but I price everything. I think I try to be pretty reasonable. The final forecast was last week. We are getting into now the rule deconstruction and the issue that I want to address. So why am I talking about this? Like, why did I want to do this PT workshop? Because it took me hours to prepare. But there is an issue that I see when I'm going through and I'm grading PTs. So what I want you to be prepared for is where the PT gives you a statute to apply. Like they specifically tell you that we need you to analyze this particular rule, but they don't show you how that rule works in the cases in the library. So you have to break down that rule. So for example, the task memo says, and this is from a California PT, could absolutely, and it has happened on MPTs, but I have to pay for licenses for the MPT. So to keep this free, I'm using examples from California, but same applies. So task memo says, please prepare a memorandum addressing whether Price violated Rule 4.2 in his dealings with Howe on each date. There were 2 dates, October 3rd and November 18th, including whether he could rely on Columbia Rule of Professional Conduct 5.2. And the library doesn't deconstruct Rule 5.2. It just says 5.2 doesn't save the attorney from the violation in that particular case. So that is Is there an echo for everybody? I think that might just be you, Dacian. Yeah, I think it's just you, no echo. Okay. So maybe leave and come back. So this is what I want you to be prepared for. Hey, Gina. So how do you do that? Hey, so you have to be able to break down a statute or any rule, right? It could literally be any rule. They might give you a rule in the case and they might not deconstruct it. They might not go in and do a deep analysis of it. That's what you need to be prepared for. That's what you need to be prepared for. So you need to know, A, what type of rule is it? I'm going to go through the different types of rules and give you examples and give you some tips for each type of rule. So these are the 5 different types of rules. So they're elemental rules, right? So you know when you have elements, you have an alternative rule, right? And I'm going to go through each of these. You might have a factor rule, you might have an exception, and you might have a combination rule. So these are the 5 types. And this might seem fairly basic, but I'm going to get into some tips for each of these. So elemental rule, right? So this is where there are a list of requirements. All of them must be met. So for example, right? For example, this is the rule for subject matter jurisdiction for diversity. District courts shall have original jurisdiction over all civil actions where the matter in controversy exceeds the sum or value of $75,000 exclusive of interest and costs and is between citizens of different states. So there's 2 elements there. There's 2 elements. One of the ways I know it is because of the and that's here. Look for words like shall or must to know that it's elemental. You don't always have that, but look for that. And also the words that follow if, when, or where, those are usually the rule components. What precedes that is generally the result. So if you have an if-then statement. So the deconstruction would look like this. So the district court, and we should all know this right now, the district court has original jurisdiction over a civil action if the matter in controversy exceeds the sum or value of $75,000 exclusive of interest and costs, and the matter in controversy is between citizens of different states. I always, and like if you have my quick sheets are those little memorization sheets. Those are my quick sheets. I use the ands, I capitalize them usually to show you that it's elements. So here's an example. This is from the February 2022 California PT, which is in Ray Price, which is what prompted me to do this session. So a subordinate lawyer does not violate these rules if, right? So if, the word if there tells me that I'm going to get my requirements. And the fact that it says if is also an indicator that it's elements because it doesn't give me any other sort of qualifier. So if that lawyer acts in accordance with a supervisory lawyer's reasonable resolution of an arguable question of professional duty. So this is the rule that made me want to do this because people didn't understand all of the components of it. And this is a little bit tougher. They don't break it down. They don't number the elements. So you need to be able to break this down. So how would you do this? So a subordinate lawyer does not violate these rules if, right, that if is a hint, that lawyer acts in accordance with. It has to come from a supervisory lawyer. So often I'm going to look for the words that are like, they didn't just tell me with a lawyer's, right? And even that's important because it would have to come from a lawyer. They didn't say with an individual's, right? It has to be a lawyer. It has to be your supervisory lawyer. The qualifier here, some English person tell me what are these called? Not like a superlative, but anyhow, this extra descriptive word here, supervisory lawyers, right? And what is it that they have to do? So it has to come with, the supervisory lawyer's reasonable resolution. So the fact here that there is this descriptor, it's not just a resolution. It's not just like a supervisory lawyer's resolution. It's their reasonable resolution. So the fact that the word reasonable in here and that's tied to resolution indicates that that's a second element that I need to analyze. And it's of something. I need to know, well, what is it of? It's not a reasonable resolution of a professional duty. It's an adjective, yes, but like there's a special type of word for this. Thank you, Karen. It drives me nuts. I can never remember it. Of an arguable question of professional duty. So it would be one thing if they said if the lawyer acts in accord with an individual's resolution of the professional duty, then it would just be like a simpler rule. But here they're telling me it has to be from your supervisory lawyer, has to be a reasonable resolution, and it has to be an arguable question of professional duty. So use these descriptors, the adjective or whatever this particular word is called, use that to help you identify the particular elements in the exam. That's how you deconstruct. So reasonable resolution of an arguable question of professional duty. People that did not deconstruct this rule, if you do not know how to do this and you get this scenario, that means you cannot get a passing score. Modifier, that's really the word. Okay, yeah, qualifier. That's always what I think. Thank you. So that is what you need to be able to do. Let me talk about the other rule type, because this is supposed to be a short session. I'm keeping it to 30 minutes and that's it. You also could have an alternative rule. An alternative statute includes at least two ways one of the statutory requirements can be satisfied. So an example of this is like venue, right? The appropriate venue is just one of three alternatives. It's either civil action may be brought in a judicial district in which any defendant resides if all defendants are residents of the state in which the district is located, a judicial district in which a substantial part of the events giving rise to the claim occurred, or a substantial part of that property is the subject of the action is situated, or, and the or is a big hint that that this is an alternative rule. Yes, Vasu, that's correct. Or if there is no district in which an action may otherwise be brought as provided in this section, then any judicial district in which any defendant is subject to the court's PJ, right? So you have to, so the or is an indicator that you just have to have one. That also means you don't need to analyze all three. You only need to analyze the one alternative that works if one of them works. If none of them work, you have to do all three. But if you instantly see that one of them works, that's all you have to do and move on. This is another way you can save time on the PT. So that's an alternative rule. You also might have a factor rule. So this is really important because factor rules come up a lot on the PT. They come up a lot. And I have like a time-saving tip specific to factor rules. So a factor statute includes a list of considerations or factors that a court weighs in determining whether one of the statutory requirements is met. So, for example, a trial court may consider all of the relevant circumstances, including the list of the following factors Columbia courts have recently delineated. One thing though, they won't always say including the list of the following factors. They might, when they say that a court may consider all relevant circumstances, including, that means that they're just going to look at all of those things to determine which way they should rule. So that's often indicates a factor test. So defendant's willfulness in violating the order to appear, whether the surety is a commercial entity, the effort and expense expended by the surety in trying to locate the defendant. Sorry, I left off a word there. So here's all of the factors. So one thing about factor rules is they're often really long. They're often really long, and this is where people really on the MPT especially, people get bogged down in this. So you really have to watch out for it. So one thing that happens is like you'll get something like this. So what I wanted to point out is on the left, I just did a screenshot from the PT where I grabbed this. And it says here, like they list the factor, whether the surety is a commercial entity. And then they have a parenthetical. Non-commercial sureties are often given more latitude concerning return of some or all of the bond. Generally speaking, when it's a factor test, I'm going to cut that parenthetical. I'm not going to type it. I'm going to read it and understand how it helps me understand what I need to do, but I'm not going to type it. So that's a way to save time when you get a factor test, because often there's like 6 factors. So you have to really be strategic with your time when you have a factor test. And you'll see here, like the effort and expense expended by the surety in trying to locate and apprehend the defendant to ensure the return of the fugitive. Then it tells you lack of effort by the surety to locate the defendant's return justifies forfeiture, etc. The cost, inconvenience, and prejudice, etc. So I cut those parentheticals. I still include all of the factors because at this point, you probably don't know which factors are more important. So yeah, so 3 tips for a factor test. If there's a parenthetical explaining the factor more, that's more there for you. I don't type it in my rule. Often they will tell you that one factor is more important than the others. So for example, whether domestic violence is present when evaluating what's in the best interest of the child or where jurisdiction is appropriate. So if they tell you that one factor is more important, we're probably going to have that factor present in our case. With factor tests, you don't always have facts relevant to analyze every single factor. So, but when there's one that they tell then yeah, you're gonna want to go ahead and do that. You know that one's probably going to be important. And then also for a factor test, a court is trying to decide between multiple outcomes. You need to evaluate each relevant factor and conclude which way it weighs. So at the end of each little section where I say, you know, where I'm doing my analysis, thus this factor weighs in favor of forfeiture or against. So with factors, with each factor, tell me which way it weighs. You can also have a combination rule where it just combines any of the things that I just talked about. So like arson. So it includes elements, it includes alternatives, it includes factors. Yeah. So here, a person's guilty of arson if they willfully and maliciously and do any of the following: sets fire, burns, causes to be burned, aids in the burning of, counsels in the burning of, procures the burning of, to the following, right? The and from point 3 here goes to number 4, to the following, any structure or forest land or property. So you have alternatives here. You could also have an exception. You could also have an exception too. I think you guys know what an exception is, so I'm not going to go in. That's the one thing I cut. But you could have an exception also. That's it. That's what I wanted to go through tonight. I told y'all, I know how important your time is right now. So I told y'all I would keep it short and tight. And that's it. I'm going to go through and look at some of the questions from the Q&A. But that's what I wanted to just really cover and really show y'all this first, like the elemental rule and the tips to look out for this stuff. Okay, let's see. I'm just going through the Q&A, not through the chat, because there's too much going in there. If you want a question answered, put it in the Q&A. You will have all the questions will be on paper. And if you signed up for the session that I did yesterday, yes, the recording is already posted and you are all welcome. I got a bunch of thank yous. Rule drills. Somebody asked about rule drills. I do recommend in these last couple of weeks that y'all do drills on the rules. Yes, like that's what you want to work on is memorization. The final forecast is about 90 minutes. So if you want to watch that video, which I definitely recommend, it's about 90 minutes and worth it. For elemental, it's usually it's one rule. Thanks, Kristen. Because somebody just said final forecast was awesome. Anonymous attendee who said for elemental, is there usually just one rule and that's how you know you need to break it down? How do you identify an elemental rule? The elemental rule is just you don't have those alternatives. So you look for, you know, this happens if these things are met. So it's really like you have the if, the when, and you don't have any of the alternatives or anything like that. If you have an exception, if you have an exception, talk about the general rule and then talk about the exception. Any tips for a foreigner, for non-native, for reading faster? I would watch the videos that I've done where you skip the facts in the intro. Occasionally, so this is a really good question. It's not too late to purchase the final forecast. It's absolutely not too late. You can watch it. Somebody that I talked to today, like I just watched it and I feel so much better. Do you need to write out the whole rule if there are 6 or more factors? You can refer to the statute. So that is something you can do. If there's tons and tons of detail, a really good example of this is K-Struckman, which is an MPT. That one, there's just too many rules to write. You could say there are lots of formalities, you know, according to the factors listed in section 47. You can do something like that. But when you have to do an analysis, you want to really make sure that you go through the relevant factors. I think that's a really good question. That's a good time saving. Practice PTs I recommend for this. I did do the breakdown, but I think the California February 2022 performance test is really good to do for that, to practice this. Even if you're an MPT person, I think it's great. For combination rules, yeah, you're just writing all of it. When there are comments below the actual rule, that you can definitely include the info. Like, you know, including more rule is helpful. It's really up to a little bit of your discretion. If it's something that feels a bit more explanatory, then you don't have to include it. If you're not sure, I would err in including it. So somebody asked for option rules. Do I set up the parts of the or that don't apply? I would just type out the rule and only analyze the one that is obviously met. So if you get 3 alternatives, you're like, it's obviously number 2, just analyze number 2. But you can also, if it's obvious to you at the beginning, you can also just type that one alternative, but I would include all of it and then just analyze the one that applies. Yes, an alternative rule has the or. If you're in final forecast, this is not in there, no. When the rule is elemental, each element that you identify, you have to apply. You have to analyze every single element, and each element must be satisfied for it to be met. And Jennifer's asked, if you mention only part of the rule that applies, I used venue as like an alternative. When you're doing the analysis, just analyze the part that applies. The person said, other than objective and persuasive, I didn't include any of the weird tasks. And a demand and opinion letter really basically looks, unless they give you a format memo telling you to do something else, which they probably would, then there's nothing really different that you're going to do. It looks like any other letter. I don't have an idea of what the topic or format will be for the July 24 PT. Some of these questions are just not related or are too long to answer. Citation really doesn't matter much. Just do short cites. That's it. If you don't do a rule proof, doesn't mean you're going to fail with the rules and analysis. No, the rule proof is there for you to use to compare the facts of your case to that. A factor rule is different from an element because you can have one, like, it's not about meeting a certain thing. Elements, you have to show all 4 elements are there, right? Like negligence is an elemental rule. There has to be duty, breach, causation, and damages. A factor rule is just you weigh the factors that are present and say which way it goes. So they're just totally different types of rules. Rule drills aren't, it's just rule drills is just drilling yourself on rules. That's it. Sorry, there's a ton of questions. This session is being recorded. It will be, you'll get an email with a link. I went over a factor rule in class in this sessions. Yes, yesterday we did the PT checkup B. If somebody asked, is it better to straight up apply a rule to the facts or do a case comparison if time is a concern? I would start with straight applying the rule to the facts and then do the case comparison. So for the cite, somebody said, for example, if it was Michael Jackson, you would cite just Jackson. You would cite the last name. No, negligence is an element test. Best way to drill rules is, I walk through this literally in my final forecast, but the best way to drill rules is to have a list of all of the rules and just write them out over and over, or quiz yourself verbally. Venue is an alternative test. Venue is an alternative test. Like best interest of the child, if you're determining child custody, for example, that's a factor test. All right, everybody, that's my 30 minutes. I've got appointments starting after this. Thank you for joining me. We'll send out a link to the recording. Thanks, everybody, so much. Really, really good luck in your studies. And hopefully we, check out the books, check out the final forecast. I do think that stuff is really, really helpful. So, and I hope you all pass. Thanks, everybody. Have a great night. Oh, hi, Kevin.